ask anybody's question but yours. You're an idiot. And really a disloyal person.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Disloyal Idiots Podcast. Christian de Guzman here alongside Steve Haller and Andy Pregler. The Golden Trio is back because it is the best time of the year, the start of football season in Central New York. Training camp began on Thursday, and boy, things have happened. Gentlemen, how are we doing?
Well, you're the one that was at training camp. I was sitting home with COVID, so I think you're having a better weekend than I am.
Oh, yeah, no, it's just been fun to get back out and cover the team again. And while we don't have the same jumble of recruits that have flooded the sidelines during the spring practice, there's still definitely a lot of action happening during the start of training camp, especially seeing a lot of the new faces and a lot of the people that Fran had brought on, and just in terms of amount of bodies, new freshmen, the copious amount of walk-ons that Fran wanted just to help out with, scout team positions and whatnot. It's fun to be back at training camp and seeing what looks to be a promising team practice once again.
Yeah, and I'm very proud of you guys. I did listen last week after I missed for being down in Honduras. I was probably underwater when you were recording. It was great. However, I am very proud of you guys for bringing up the weights and the changes in weight, and who the hell knows what happened with Cody Hornsby, but yeah, that was it's good to see guys that needed to put on some bulk, guys that needed to cut a couple of pounds seem to have cut some pounds. It seems like Fran's got the weight room turned around in the direction that we wanted to go, and now you get to see it in action. So I guess, what, Christian, were your first takes? I know if anyone checks out newsmagician.com, our sister site, there's plenty of takes up there. But after, what'd you get, half an hour on Thursday?
Yeah, we got half an hour on Thursday, a half an hour on Friday, yeah.
So anything big jump at you guys? I know you were there as well as a couple of other Noons guys.
I think one of the big thing that I took away, and it was talked about when I hopped on ESPN Syracuse with Stephen Fonte and Paulie, is that there's a huge gap between McCord and the rest of the quarterback room. We were fortunate enough to see like a fast, quote unquote, 2-minute drill on Thursday. With some, rapid fire reps between 1v1s, 2v2s, 3v3s. And you could just tell that McCord was a lot more confident in accurately placing the ball to his intended targets. And the talent gap in the quarterback room is quite drastic. And it was something that, Steve and Paulie brought up on ESPN Syracuse, is the starter for next season at quarterback on the roster right now? And I don't think it is.
Absolutely not.
And he's vehemently shaking his head.
Yes.
I'm gonna say it this way, and like, this is not meant to be like Andy's hot take against Fran Brown, but like, if Fran Brown is any level of program manager that he has indicated in his last year, like in the not even last year, the last 6 months, the starting quarterback at Syracuse is playing college football in another school somewhere. Whether it's a situation like Kyle McCord, where we go out and we get a player that doesn't live up to overhyped expectations and then decides to come to Syracuse a la McCord. Whether it's a situation where we grab a player that is squeezed out during a roster crunch, which is something that we saw happen a lot during this portal cycle, where just by nature of the dominoes, you see things happen. I don't think that we are going to see Carson Del Rio Wilson.
Carlos.
I always want to say Carson. Carlos Del Rio Wilson. I don't think we see him start a game if the plan is, if everything's going according to plan. I think the more likely scenario here is that this is a guy who was at Florida. This is a guy who obviously had potential and hasn't figured out a way to break through yet. He's probably fine being a career backup a la Charlie Loeb, who was, again, a really highly rated recruit. Like, he was a high 3-star and just never really was able to put it together in a way that mattered. But he was a great 4-year backup because of all the things that, as Christian kind of alluded to at the top, there's so much that happens in a football practice. There's so much that happens in a camp, both preseason and postseason, that you need to have multiple guys on the roster for. It doesn't have to be a quarterback competition for you to have a successful quarterback room. And I think that we are at a point where the depth at the quarterback recruiting is just not there yet. Shout out to John Casillo, former News Magician editor-in-chief guy, who I believe one of his last pieces that he wrote was like, I forget what the exact title of it was, but it was essentially like, this is how you put together a really good recruiting class every year, even with the transfer portal. And it essentially is, you need to bring in at least one freshman recruit per year in order to stock the room, knowing that one's probably going to leave in the portal and that you're going to grab another one via the portal to replace them. But you need to consistently have a new young person come in order to get that depth before you can even consider starting from within. And I think that we've seen that with Syracuse. This is not on Fran. This is not on Dino. It's a little bit on Dino, but like ultimately the way that the post-Dungy era has gone at Syracuse has prevented us from doing that successfully.
Yeah, and I think if you go back there, and if we want to go historic on it with starting with Dungy, we all know that the DeVito, lady in waiting situation was what kept another freshman from coming in, making a difference, whatever. Made it very difficult for Dino to sign another QB for those 2 years. Inherently, from that point on, there should have been more action than there was. There wasn't really a ton. He did try and address things in the portal with Braden Davis, with Carlos Del Rio Wilson, but ultimately came up short, especially on the recruiting front, especially when you have like Lenora Sellers flipping to South Carolina at the last minute, which, okay, kids are going to flip to an SEC school. That's going to happen.
Yeah.
But right now, the makeup of that QB room is 2 true freshmen in AJ Williams and Jakari Williams, or AJ Miller and Jakari Williams. AJ Miller is a walk-on, Jakari, or PWO. Jakari is a 3-star recruit. Decent look. I don't know what he looked like in person. Only Christian does, but looked decent on film. You also have, you don't have Braden Davis anymore. He is now officially listed as a wideout. And then you have Michael Johnson Jr., who was originally brought in as a wideout, pending a offseason surgery, which apparently went okay. So he's now your 3rd string as a redshirt senior, and Del Rio Wilson as just the backup as a redshirt junior. Yeah. So you've got some weird, like you've got a nice makeup of classes. You have a nice makeup of where people are in the pecking order. We just need to kind of raise that floor, and I think that's been the theme so far of what Fran has been able to do in a lot of different positions. And if we can see him do that at the QB spot, that should drastically help some things.
And on that note, I just want to call out, losing Sellers really did kind of create this situation, but Sellers is starting at South Carolina this year. We are in a situation where if we had gotten Sellers, we do not have Kyle McCord. And while I think we are now comparing 2 different D1 starting quarterbacks here, I don't think Sellers generates the same hype that McCord does, even though I think the ceiling on Sellers is remarkably higher than it is on McCord. And yes, Christian, I think you were reading my mind here. Sellers is also a very different type of quarterback than Kyle McCord is.
Yeah, but at the same time, think about this timing-wise. If we had Lenora Sellers on the roster last year, when we were forced to play Del Rio Wilson or Davis, you have somebody different that can come in who, when he came in at South Carolina, made a name for himself. So right now, is this QB room and is everything looking significantly differently? So to play the what if game, it's we're not Marvel. We don't have a whole line of comics to run this out, but like it drastically changes how the whole room looked last year, let alone this year, if they land him.
Yeah, and as Tim is, thanks for joining the show, Tim. In NCAA football, like Sellers is kind of that fun cheat code quarterback in video games. Again, the ceiling on him is remarkably high, and we can play the what if game, but I do think it's very hard to imagine a universe where Sellers and McCord are both on this roster. And honestly, like,
but
speaking from,
Sellers, do you need McCord?
Exactly. And I don't see, but I think that when you talk about what does Syracuse need for this year, like what is it that Fran Brown is bringing to this program that has gotten everybody excited? It's the fact that when Paul Feinbaum is talking about Syracuse, he's talking about Ohio State starting quarterback Kyle McCord being on the roster. He's not talking about all of the other 4-star talent that they brought in. They're not talking about Fidel Diggs, even though Fidel Diggs is really good. They're not talking about the Colorado offensive line transfers in Washington. They're not talking about all these other recruits that he's pulling in. They're talking about Kyle McCord. And I do think that when you look at, like, which would we rather have long-term, probably Sellers. But, like, I don't know if we are getting the national attention, if we're getting this revamped excitement around the program that is so important to college football in this particular day and age in 2024, if it's not Kyle McCord. And again, that has nothing to do with his talent. That has nothing to do with like his 85 versus Sellers 79. If we're playing video game numbers here, it has everything to do with the way that this sport manufactures talk and about how much of this sport is played out outside of the field and by head coaches interacting with that community. And it's something that Fran does incredibly well.
Well, and McCord has done very well from the point he's gotten here. He's been very much adopted as this face of the program type situation. Now that said, Tim brings up another good point. He says, "I watched McCord last year, not much faith in him personally for Syracuse." That's something we've been hearing from Ohio State fans or whatever, or people in general that have watched a good bit of, and not to insinuate Tim's an Ohio State fan or something, but like the people that have watched him are saying, that they're not amazingly impressed. The thing is, those people, if you're watching a ton of Ohio State football, you're also not watching what Syracuse has had for a long time at quarterback. So, like, the level of QB we're used to compared to McCord is, well, it's a weird step down from McCord. Like, there's nobody that we've had in the last couple of years, including Dungy, who can throw a football like Kyle McCord can.
Yeah, and I do think that this is like a really important point to kind of put the bow on the conversation. The bigger question I have about McCord is not about what he's done at Ohio State. It's what can Syracuse do with a quarterback like Kyle McCord? Because we have seen Dino make the decision, instead of having, I'm not going to get a good offensive line, so I'm going to get a quarterback who can run away from pressure. And Eric Dungy was a quarterback who
favorite strategy. Steve and I's favorite strategy.
Yep. And Eric Dungy came in like that, and then all of a sudden turned into a very above average thrower at the short and medium range and an excellent deep ball thrower. And that made defenses make really difficult decisions that Syracuse was then able to take advantage of with their tempo. When they abandoned the tempo, when tempo kind of got phased out of the sport as a differentiator, when Syracuse went to a quarterback that didn't have that kind of arm, you saw the whole thing kind of fall apart and the offense need to go in a different direction. A la Sean Tucker, thank you so much for everything that you did for us. But McCord is not that guy. Like we've been hearing that McCord, and I think this is like one of the stories that's been coming out of this week that I think is really interesting. Fran and Kyle McCord are clearly trying to insinuate that they want teams to think McCord will be more mobile this year. Whether that's like designed runs, whether that's more moving pockets. Both Fran and Kyle McCord have said multiple times during this week in interviews that they value his legs in a way that Ohio State did not. And I do not know if this is coach speak. This is us just trying to plant seeds in opponents' minds to continually say, like, throw out what you saw on McCord previously, or if this is a legitimate focus of the offense. And then for reasons that we can get into later. But yeah, Steve, I'm with you. I think this is all just BS coach speak, trying to play the games before it happens, because there is nothing in what Kyle McCord does well that makes me want to have him be running like bootlegs on any sort of consistent manner.
No, I think this is also a couching to the people that are listening to those interviews of he's not going to be a straight pocket passer because he can't be a straight pocket passer with the current situation around him at Syracuse. We don't have, no matter what upgrades we did to the offensive line, we will not have the hogs that a Big Ten school does. Like the top tier Big Ten schools are going to have a better offensive line than Syracuse. And McCord, if he does not use his legs, will be on his ass a lot, as we've seen for a lot of Syracuse quarterbacks. And I think this is starting to couch some expectations in there as much as it is anything else on that of, yeah, he's going to be shuffling. He's going to be moving around in the pocket. And that it's, I think that's the only way you can spin it at this point.
And I think, again, like always with this offense, it comes down to the same kind of questions. And until we're proven otherwise, even with a new head coach, just because of the roster construction, those questions will continue to remain until they are answered with a definitive yes. And that's offensive line and receiver. Syracuse hasn't had that go-to person in the wide receiver room in quite some time. And right now, the go-to receiver is a tight end in Orlando Gadsden. You don't know who they exactly, quote-unquote, tight end. David Hale wants to put him as a slot receiver in the ACC voting, which is probably correct, honestly. But that aside, his position is tight end, so we might as well, unfortunately, that's the best way to say it. So who steps up from the wide receiver room to help McCord give him another target? Because it wasn't just Marvin Harrison at Ohio State. There was plenty of other talent there in that receiver room that could help out Kyle McCord. And then, like Steve and Andy said, can the offensive line hold up long enough to keep McCord as the pocket passer that he wants to be, not the mobile quarterback he is forced to evolve into because of said offensive line?
Now, was it 2 weeks ago you and I touched on it, or maybe Andy and I touched on it? That wide receiver room, I have a lot more faith in it than I think I should.
Yeah, I'm on the very opposite end of that spectrum, which is
Let me finish that thought, because I feel like the bottom end of that receiver room has drastically risen. I don't know if the top end has gone anywhere, but the bottom, like the floor of that receiver room has drastically increased from where we were between the additions of Meeks and Haynes and Ross Simmons and, like, for all intents and purposes, a healthy Trebor Pena. Emmanuel Ross apparently was a stud in spring camp. Like there's a lot of options, that I don't think I felt remotely comfortable with last year. Last year was kind of hoof the ball out to Damian Alford and hope that something happened, and hope that he actually caught it. But it seems like the bottom has risen, and I think that's going to be hopefully a continuing concept for all of these different position groups. And whether it's quick, it may not be quick, but to iterate some of these position groups to a higher level, it's going to help out in the long term, or even like slightly near term.
Yeah.
And Christian's got the entire wide receiver room up.
Along with a couple of fill-in players that EA College Football has thrown in there. But
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think the biggest questions I have on the roster in the room are what are we getting out of Zed Haynes and what are we getting out of Meeks? Both of those guys, again, brought in via the transfer portal. Both guys are part of Fran's kind of talent injection and depth injection that we've seen on the roster. But if you imagine that Syracuse wants to line up in some form of traditional personnel grouping where you have 3 receivers, a tight end, and a running back, you've got this weird game where Trebor is your traditional slot guy. You've got then Oronde in the big slot guy role. You then, and Ross, big slot guy role. You've got Ross probably as the only natural outside receiver. Sorry, not that Ross Simmons.
Yes, that Ross.
As probably the only natural deep wide receiver. But one of the things that you're not seeing here, and I think EA does a nice job of capturing this, none of these guys are really like throw it deep and beat a guy. All of these guys are like Pena and Oronde are 2 different variations of beat a guy in tight space. Oronde with his size, Pena with his moves. Simmons is a true traditional like route runner, and like again, something that the video game has well, where like he is a timing guy. Like he is all about like his connection with McCord is going to determine whether or not he gets touches. I'm assuming that there will be plenty of times where we see Oronde try to take advantage of a team just sitting in a cover 2 shell, where he's running some kind of deep route over the middle and splitting the safeties. But we did see last year that one of the easiest ways to lighten up boxes is to have a guy like Damian Alford who can just have a track meet on the outside and force teams to respect the passing game outside of man-to-man. And again, I think that these 2 transfers that we're looking at in Haynes and Meeks are probably the best 2 options to do that. But I don't know if they can do much else. And as we saw with like another guy on that roster that we did not mention is Umari Hatcher, you got to catch the ball in order to be a good wide receiver, which is something that Hatcher has really struggled to do in his years here. And is a reason why, like, when he was coming in as a recruit, I thought he had all the potential in the world. And he's had the potential and he's had the moments. He just can't hold on to the ball.
So, Andy, you bring up something about that wide guy needing to be a track guy. You know who we have that was a Texas State track champion in the sprint and is 6'3"? That'd be Darrell Gill Jr.
Yes.
This is a very good point.
So, I mean, he's a tall, fast human being that can run down the field and catch a football, which is kind of what you're looking for. I don't know what he's looked for or looked like or how he's
in the spring game he got in the spring game he got a couple of touches, especially with the ones, which is very, very impressive. And now that was before Justice Ross Simmons was on the team. That was before Jackson Meeks returned from his off-season surgery. Same with Oronde Gadsden, who was also having that spring surgery as well. So he was one of the main options alongside Pena, Hatcher, Haynes, and Gill were the main options that were showcased, at least in spring training. Now, I haven't really paid too much attention yet to the wide receiver room, just based on the short snippets that we've gotten in practice. Because on the other side of the ball, we'll get to that, is the main other big chunk of time that I spent watching during practice so far in training camp. But it's speed always is going to kill, no matter what is going to happen. And Gil definitely has that, even if the rating right now doesn't show it. Is that he's definitely got not only skill, but he's got the hops as well at 6'3". I mean, when you looked at it in a spring game, soaring over double coverage to make a catch, it's there. So there is potential, if necessary, for Gil to even break in. And it'll depend, because it seems like, elsewhere among the depth chart, that if the right person is there to take it, Fran is not going to be afraid to put in some younger talent.
Yeah, I think it's all really intriguing. I think that we would be. I think that it's week 1 of camp. We haven't seen a lot of this footage yet. We haven't gotten a chance to talk to a lot of these guys yet and kind of see how things are shaping out. But I do think that the underrated part of this that we aren't going to really have a full dive into yet is what does what is the connection with Kyle McCord look like? Because that's that's so much of what we've seen it before with quarterbacks at Syracuse. You get your favorites and you go from there. I think it's really, really interesting to see how this all plays out. And so I do think that one of the things that we have to kind of mention here, we talked a little bit about the offensive line. And one of the big conversations around the offensive line has been Savion Washington coming in. It seemed, again, Christian, this is Christian's reporting into our own Slack group, talking about what the offensive line looks like in early drills, going left to right, tackle to tackle. Weatherspoon at left tackle, Bradford at left guard, Reed at center, Petrie at right guard, Washington at right tackle.
And beware, that's a very way too early look at that line. That was the very first play of spring training that I got that line from. So, or training camp that I got that line from. So that could very well change.
Oh, and it likely will. But if nothing else, that's showing you. I mean, was there anybody that was disqualified from? Was there anybody sidelined or?
No, there were 2 people, I think, with black non-contact jerseys, and neither of them were expected starters.
Right. So, I mean, if nothing else, that's giving you a gauge for what we're starting with, which to me, I'm very surprised Enrique Cruz is not that left tackle. That either means to me that there was a drastic drop-off in what Cruz is doing, or Weatherspoon is just that much of a improvement over someone who I thought was a stalwart left tackle last year. Jacob Bradford, January Reed, Mark Petrie, that's the core we finished the campaign with. I guess that, it is what it is there. And Savion Washington on that right side over any of the incumbents it's either a testament to what got brought in or a testament to how poor the room was prior.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about bad rooms, Steve, you are just setting us up, because one of the things that came out in the Athlon Sports story about the Colorado locker room is some of the things that happened allegedly there. And Savion Washington was brought into the story. Jordan Seaton, a 5-star recruit, was allegedly put in, says that he was allegedly bullied into proving his manhood, is the exact quote, and was, quote, picked to fight former CU lineman Savion Washington. In April, the two were said to have exchanged blows, leaving both bloody. Witnesses described it as 2 bears scrapping for food. Ignoring all of the Dion and all of the everything about that, I think that when you talk about improving the room and the pitch that Fran is making to players, especially like in that line, I think that this is a good indication that Fran is going to be able to do things with guys like Washington moving forward. And I'm most interested to see how good Washington is, because if he is a very good right tackle, and he is somebody who is obviously one of the better offensive linemen that we have on this team, and Fran is able to kind of use this as proof of concept of say, like, look, if your situation right now is FUBAR, I can come to Syracuse, thrive, and get everything back on track. That becomes really, really helpful in a world where the NIL and player compensation stuff is only going to get messier, and you're going to need to have something else besides we can pay you to entice recruits and transfers to your campus.
And also the right side of this line, ever since 2018, has always been the weak part of the line. Midway through 2019, you had Bergeron, and then after Bergeron left, you had Cruz, who was kind of like settled down on the left side of the line to help anchor at least at the left tackle spot, and with the rotating of whoever you wanted at left guard. But that right side of the line has always been kind of the weaker side, no matter who you've put on there. So if you can put Washington there and he proves that he's a capable force there, that's a big boon to Syracuse for a position that hasn't necessarily seen the best uptick of talent in quite some time.
That is the largest understatement you've had in a while.
I made a good point about offensive line, and Steve approved. Yes.
Speaking of things that Steve approves of, Home Field Apparel, makers and purveyors of some of the finest vintage clothing that you're going to find out there. If you're looking for something Syracuse, whether it's a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, a hoodie, a bomber jacket, a pair of joggers, a hat, a jersey, they've got it. You'll love it. A lot like me, still wearing the Vita the Goat, from the original drop, that I still love this shirt so much. Home Field Apparel will have you covered all football season right now. They are in their countdown to kickoff series. It's going to be a 4-week series of really cool drops that they're doing. We're talking about team boxes, new schools being added, new designs being added to existing schools, and a whole new apparel line drop in coaches' jackets. If any of that sounds interesting, make sure you follow Home Field Apparel on Instagram or X. And also make sure that you go over to homefieldapparel.com and use promo code NOONS24. New promo code NOONS24 for 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com.
New season, new promo code. Yay.
New season, new promo code NUNES24 for 15% off your first order at Home Field Apparel. Thank you again for sponsoring us for yet another season. Our friends at Home Field taking care of us here at the Disloyal Idiots.
I was rocking that Cuse ringer. Is that still available? I know that was originally a limited drop.
I have not checked the Syracuse collection in a minute. I'm about to. I'm waiting for those football boxes that they're dropping. I think those are going to be some of my Christmas gifts to members of my family that I don't ever really know what to get things for, and I'm just going to buy those now.
I thought you were going to say they were going to be Christmas gift to yourself.
I mean, I might get a Cincinnati one just because my aunt just retired from her tenured professor position there, and I always have now that they're officially in the Big 12 and no longer a thorn in Syracuse's side, might give them some love. But the Christmas gift idea was like, ooh, this sounds like a great idea.
Wow. It's been a while since I looked at the Cuse ones.
Mm-hmm. The dad hat is particularly calling my name. The brown one with the old Syracuse pennant logo.
We have a baseball tee. We have a baseball tee, everybody. Steve will be owning the baseball tee at some point.
Please,
Home Field did
Syracuse, make a baseball program. Please, I'm begging you.
And if you want to go to the finest Jim Boeheim and Mike Hopkins look, they do have the 90s quarter zip with the 90s S on it, which is also pretty awesome.
Yeah, I'm not a NASCAR person, but the fact that they got into NASCAR is the most Indianapolis thing that I could possibly imagine from Connor and the guys. But I've never been a big Vroom Vroom fan, but if you are a Vroom Vroom fan, they've got you covered.
Oh, they do have the banana slugs have officially launched too.
Oh yes, that was one of the new ones too. They're having a great time. I will say, I'm sorry for I mentioned the bomber jackets. The Cuse Retro Auto bomber jacket is sold out. You just have to look at me and Christian enviously in order to partake in that, which is still my favorite shirt that I own.
I wear that bomber jacket all the time, except the Syracuse Sporting events because I'm a neutral, unbiased media member.
As they all say. I am currently very much waiting for fall.
Because I think the last time I was in the press box was the only time that I've seen the press box erupt, and that was the Trill Pick 6.
That was a fun time.
But it wasn't the pick 6; it was the strip 6, right?
The strip 6, yeah. Yep. That
good old Trill.
Like 3/4 of the press box like erupted, and then sat back down because we were all supposed to be neutral.
Neutral, unbiased media members.
Yep. Oh, I didn't realize that the banana slug dad hat is sold out. Dang it.
Mm.
Oh well, I mean the ringer tee looks fantastic, and all the slugs are fantastic.
Stick to my anteaters for all my University of California, not Berkeley needs.
I love when we just spend time looking at the home field apparel. The ad read turns into just us having a really fun time looking at all the things that home field has to offer and give us happiness and joy, because sometimes you need that in life. What is providing me happiness and joy as we talk about Syracuse football again? Syracuse.com has been absolutely killing the coverage this week. Same with our friends over at newsposition.com, but there's been some really interesting stories this week over at .com talking to some of the players. One of the ones that I kind of want to talk about here with you all was the Justin Barron article. I don't know if either of you had gotten a chance to read. I believe it was from Emily who posted the Justin Barron read. It's very similar to the Aronde story.
It was Chris Carlson.
Chris Carlson. There we go. Well, I love Chris. That's probably why I liked it. He and I, he'll always have a soft spot in my heart. Chris interviewed Justin Barron, and much like the Aronde story, Barron was ready to put his name in the transfer portal. Had the paperwork all done, met with Fran. That conversation with Fran convinced him to stay in Syracuse. And part of the reason that he said that he was looking to go into the transfer portal is that the shifts on the defensive side of the ball in the last couple of years really kind of messed with his professional outlook. So last season, he plays with a broken wrist for most of the season, which, again, wrist was casted up. It was pretty obvious what was happening there. I believe we mentioned it several times on the show of the number of times that he was just sticking that wrist out there and clubbing balls out of the air. But he essentially said that, like, look, the first couple of weeks, it took me a while to remember how to figure out how to tackle with this. Like, I had to change my form. And then he went into the off season, and 2 seasons of playing in the weird rover position essentially made him undraftable. NFL scouts didn't think that he was big enough to play in a traditional NFL front 7, and they didn't think he was good enough in coverage and or fast enough to play in a secondary role, even as a primary run stuffer. What I took as very interesting in this story was that he mentions that in the new 4-2-5 system that Syracuse is expected to play, he's obviously going to be a starter, but he's not going to be in the rover position. But it sounds like he's going to be playing in some kind of edge rusher type role. Potentially as like a drop back into coverage and fake defensive looks as well. Like obviously playing more of like a stand-up linebacker kind of position. TJ Watt is not the exact comparison I'm going to make here, because Watt plays with his hand in the ground a lot more than I think people realize Watt does. But it's that very new age NFL athletic edge rush guy who we also trust in pass coverage because you make really good reads on the quarterback. I think this is fascinating because the offensive side of the ball has gotten a lot of press, but the defensive side of the ball hasn't gotten as much talk. And I would argue that Elijah Robinson is probably more qualified as a defensive coach, even though he's never been a defensive coordinator, as compared to the other side of the ball. And I do think that this is a really, really interesting development as we try to figure out what they're going to do, because a good defense does include Justin Barron being at a very high level. And Barron specifically said that Fran, who has a background as a defensive backs coach, said that he can get Fran drafted this season.
You know what this kind of signals to me they're envisioning Barron's role to be? What a defensive version of a false nine looks like. Or
Go on.
because essentially it's that guy that you don't know exactly what he's going to do. And he can be anything and everything, like a Swiss Army knife, kind of just like a lot of people want to be. Tim, I don't watch a lot of Cincinnati Bengals NFL, unfortunately. Same with Steve and Andy, because they're different. They're different teams as well. Don't ask what Andy's team is; you're going to be mad. But because it feels like when you think about a false nine in soccer, talking Steve and Andy's language, it's a forward and a striker who can do basically everything that you need them to be, but also be a support role in terms of what the attack needs to be. And I think that's what Barron essentially will be able to do, is be a support role in whatever situation Syracuse needs him to be. And his versatility in those skill sets will make him hard to defend against. Because we've already seen that past Syracuse defenses need the linebackers to do many things, both be good in pass coverage and solid in pass coverage, but also be lethal rushers to the backfield. And if Barron can be a just decent enough pass rusher or run stopper from a linebacker position, it's going to make it really, really hard for opposing quarterbacks to identify what his role is going to be and how they should adjust according to that as well. And which is what also a false nine can be as well, because like imagine casting my back to when Messi was playing at that position at Barcelona. You never knew if he was going to, stand back and let the wingers take the attack on the inside, or if he was going to push up himself as well and join in that attack. So it creates a versatility and a confusion, and I think Syracuse's defense has been looking for in a bit, because even though linebackers were supposed to be that versatile type of player in the 3-3-5 system, more often than not, the linebackers in Syracuse's defense were not great pass protectors. And if you can have Barron play that role as a pseudo linebacker, pseudo safety, a la a false nine for a defense, that could create some good confusion that is very necessary for a Syracuse defense that's needed a way to create confusion for opposing defenses or opposing offenses.
So building off that a little, Andy, correct me if I'm wrong. In that article, I believe there was a quote mentioning that Brown explicitly told Barron that he was going to be able to utilize his instincts a lot more this year.
Correct.
And that would almost be that would almost fit with what you're talking, Christian, of that freedom, that kind of wild card role of him being able to read what the offense is doing and just react and just do it. Whether that's, staying in coverage on the slot guy, or whether that's, going full send on the quarterback. Him using his instincts to fill in the gaps for whatever the defense needs.
So in the article, Chris says, Brown watched Barron's film, his father said, but Brown told him that he was a good player. There were moments, he said, where he could tell Barron had recognized what the offense was going to do. In many of these moments, Brown noted, Barron would hesitate, worrying about whether his teammates were on the same page and what would happen if they weren't. He promised Barron would be able to use those instincts.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. I think it's really good because one of the things that has been mentioned by many prognosticators about Syracuse is that this roster is improved. But historically, teams with new head coaches do not take a step forward in terms of wins and losses because the scheme changes everything that's changing around them. It's just not something that really goes over well in college historically. But especially when you're talking on the defensive side of the ball with this scheme shift, Barron's not going to be a rover, but we're really not moving too far away from the old Rocky Long system 3-3-5. If the 4-2-5 is going to be more of a 3-5-ish situation where Barron might be like, Barron's really kind of like the hybrid there. Like maybe he's down, maybe he's got his hand down, maybe he's standing up, maybe whatever. Like the system is going to be a lot of he can fill in with what we need and provide that wild card element to make the transitions easier for us.
So what I'm hearing and what my brain is processing through is this iteration of the defense is inherently what we were thinking that rover position was going to be, not what it actually was, but when the concept was first brought to us, what we expected that to be of it being effectively a 4-2 with that extra guy rolling up wherever, which I'm mildly excited for because we were very excited about that concept and then it just never quite happened. It just turned into another nickel. Like, I mean, it's out. Tony White's first year, sure, novel, did things, everything was great. Rocky Long's iteration was very much just weird.
Sorry, I keep forgetting about like how we lost our defensive coordinator to Nebraska, and he's now one of the highest paid coordinators in college football. Like that was a guy who was at Syracuse for a minute. Oh man, what a great time! Sorry,
It was a finalist for UCLA's head coaching job before Nebraska decided to throw money bags at him and say, "Please stay."
Hey, you know who else we had as a coordinator? Sterling Gilbert. So, the averages are the law of averages.
It's a great point.
So, but yeah, I mean, if it's something in that iteration where they're utilizing Barron as a reactive force, that's going to, be a benefit to everybody and be very fun to watch.
I really liked my false nine analogy, and I'm really sticking to that because I think that's essentially what he could be for this defense.
Might be worth a write up on Noons. That was actually Kevin speaking through me on that. That was.
Speaking of Kevin,
I know who I'm going to talk to during our next defensive interviews.
There you go. Speaking of Kevin, we would be remiss if we did not mention Syracuse alum Freddie Crittenden's performance today. It was a very weird performance. So Freddie Crittenden from Syracuse, well, actually, I don't know where he's from, but
no, he's from Syracuse.
Yeah,
attended Syracuse. Yeah,
he competed in the 110 hurdles today, but came in dead last due to what he stated was not an injury, but was an injury.
Yes, very weird.
Some tightness or something that wasn't going to keep him from competing, but there was a chance he felt like something may go more catastrophically wrong. So his hopes to make the final rest in the last chance qualifier that has a name that I cannot remember, Rapid Charge or something along those lines.
Something like that.
Very fancy.
Basically, he'll have to run 3 days in a row at an extremely high level to to place in the finals. But this is basically the last chance qualifier to get into the semis, and then he will have to finish in the top 4 of the semis to make it into the final. So that's going to be an uphill battle for him, but he did not want to risk the injury today. So we'll see more from him, I believe, on Tuesday.
It'll be Tuesday in the wee hours of the morning. I believe it's like 4:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time that he will be running. And if any of the track action today is an indication, it's going to be thrilling all around. No spoilers because Andy has yet to watch it. And I want.
Oh
to,
no,
I want,
I've seen the memes. I know exactly what's going to happen. But
you're not ready to see how it happened. And
I'm not ready to see how it happened. Correct.
Yeah. It's important for you to see how it happened. So there is one final thing I want to touch on, football-wise, before we move on to other Syracuse-related topics. Because it relates to an article that Kevin posted earlier this week, and it's something that I spent a good majority of the time in on Friday in practice on training camp watching Syracuse, and it's the quarterback position. Because there's a lot of question marks around that cornerback position right now, since you don't have Isaiah Johnson. Deuce Chestnut is not playing cornerback; he's moving over to safety to play alongside Barron and Clark. So you have an open spot up for grabs, you would assume, because Jaden Bellamy, who inherited the starting position last year, you would assume would probably be a front runner for one of those positions to be the starting cornerback, but maybe not, because you've got a lot of talent there as well. Devin Grant, a Buffalo transfer, a Notre Dame transfer, and Clarence Lewis. You even have right now a person who's getting a lot of praise in camp, true freshman Marcellus Barnes. And that's not to mention other names like Greg Delano, Marcus Washington, but there's a lot of unproven talent in that cornerback room. And that could be a key part of the defense, kind of like back in the mid 2010s. Cornerback was a glaring weakness for this team back in the mid 2010s. Mm-hmm. And if Syracuse doesn't make the right decisions, that could be a really weak part of this Syracuse team defensively, on a place where it seems like the defensive line has improved with the additions of Fadil Diggs and Dion Wilson. You've got the linebacker room being led by Morrow Langston. We've talked about the safeties already, but that quarterback room could be an area of concern if Syracuse doesn't make the right decision there. And that's why when I was watching practice, the defensive back rooms actually split up into safety groups and cornerback groups. And the quarterback groups, at least for the open part of practice, were being coached by Fran Brown. He was there throughout the entirety of the drills that they were doing in the open practice, which was fascinating to see. And not only coaching those guys hard, like he's obviously still a defensive backs coach at heart, because he was really drilling into those guys hard, still bringing awesome intensity to all his instructions and what he wants to see from that group. But it could get interesting to see where Syracuse goes on opening day against Ohio with that cornerback position.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Corner's been so weird over the years.
Yeah, it has been.
From that dearth to like straight up DBU for a while to like where we are now, which is again similar to what we're talking about with the offensive line. Deuce being moved out of the corner slot makes me wonder whether there were players that surpassed him or there was something else. Like there's a reason that he wanted Deuce in the middle of the field, which I'm not going to complain about. Like everything we saw of Chestnut 2 years ago was, he's just a great athlete. And if we have two corners that can cover and, make up space and handle their men on the outside, that frees Deuce up to be, maybe he's a slot corner. Maybe he's something else across the middle. I don't have we determined where he's lining up, what he's doing at this point?
Deuce is definitely at least in the safety position. Yeah, I mean, he's going to be essentially what Jason Simmons was last year. He's taking over that. He's taking over that role. Gotcha. That's what we saw all throughout spring camp, and nothing has been adjusted to convince me otherwise.
Yeah, I'd be curious if because slot corner has kind of become such a thing, whether if we run, if we go to a more traditional nickel for some of our pass heavy things we're lining up against, whether they roll another safety out there and just kind of drop him into straight coverage there in that middle of the field where now he's getting a little more comfortability. It might not be a bad way to throw him out there.
Potentially. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot to still be sorted out in that room, and it would not surprise me at all if what we saw versus Ohio is not what we saw come week 6 or week 7. I think that especially when you just look at the roster construction, the number of redshirt sophomores that are in that group seems very ripe for play, like hit the transfer portal next year if it doesn't work out for you kind of vibes.
Wow. I did not realize that until you said that now.
No, like that. I'm just like going through it like from a roster construction standpoint. Like,
yeah,
there's 3 cornerback slots at the most that you can have. 2 if you're going to use Barron in a defensive back hybrid role instead of a down front 7 kind of role, or front 6 role rather. And there's just not a lot of like, look, at the end of the year, you're hoping that some of the juniors and seniors move on here, but like, nah, this room is pretty much staying the same going to next year. That's not going to happen if you're not going to play, especially as a redshirt sophomore. So you're hoping that Bellamy is probably going to be one of the best ones. I think Lewis and Grant are obviously the next ones that you're looking at, just considering the pedigree that they have and where they come from. But again, like Lewis is obviously the only one that's guaranteed to move on at the end of this year. Everybody else could still stay. And
who is Lewis supposed to be? Oh no, Lewis is the transfer in. I forgot about
that. Lewis is the Notre Dame transfer in. The only person
right
here who's a placeholder is Newkirk, whoever this guy is. I'm not sure what kind of placeholder he's supposed to be for in the current EA rosters. At least on this screen. Same with Lincoln, the freshman at the very bottom. But everyone else here on this screen, that if you're watching on the live stream, everyone else apart from Newkirk and Lincoln are all real Syracuse players.
Well, and they also don't have Greg Delane on there. So that's another redshirt sophomore to add.
Yeah. So, yeah. Who
so Delane,
may or may not have. Yeah.
You've got Cornell Perry, you've got Jaleel Martin, and you've got Jaden Bellamy that are all redshirt sophomores.
Yeah, and Corner Bellamy is here at the free safety position.
For some reason.
Again, like, I do think that this is like where, to your point, Christian, about Fran getting in with these guys on day one, I think that says a lot. 1, about like where Fran's still comfortable being, but 2, I don't think this is going to be a static group that we see throughout the year. I think this is going to be transitioning. I think that there's obviously going to be a lot of competition there, but this is going to be I think this is going to be the position group a lot like the linebacker group of a few years ago before Marlo Wax really kind of like took hold of that group. Where, look, we might just be playing the hot hand at times. Like, look, if these two combinations of guys are working and shutting guys down, great, we're going to keep them out there. The minute that we start seeing things kind of go sideways, great, we're going to roll out some other guys here. I just don't know if, to your original point, Christian, I just don't know if there's a ton of separation between any of these guys yet. And developing that separation is going to be the most interesting story of the defense for this upcoming season.
Definitely. It'll be interesting to see who trots out there first on week 1 against Ohio.
Yeah. I think it'll be interesting to see who's the starters come the series of road games in October. Because I'm fairly confident that it's not going to be the same guys, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah.
But this is again, Syracuse football. It's gonna be interesting, which is not what I mean, we made it in last year, but this is going to be great.
Yeah, it's always interesting here in Syracuse.
It's always something.
Understatement of the years.
You're looking for something.
Yeah.
No, I thought my internet was just being bad again, and I was on delay. But not going to delay anybody any further here. That is it for this week's edition of the Disloyal Idiots podcast. We really appreciate you guys tuning in for an hour of preseason football talk, a little bit of track and field talk. We will have more of probably this exact same lineup. Lots of preseason camp talk, a little bit of track and field talk. Next week, we do this show Sundays, 8 p.m. Eastern. If you want to join us on the live stream on Fans First Sports Network, Disloyal Idiots YouTube channel, and our Twitch channel, make sure you follow us over there. If you are listening to us on podcast form, thank you so much. We really do appreciate the continued support and subscriber support. Make sure that you like us. Make sure that you rate us 5 stars. We need to trick that AI into expanding the Ottoman Empire. Thank you again to our support of our sister site, noonsmagician.com. You can read all of Christian's amazing football work over there. He'll continually be covering the team this week as we head into week 2 of fall camp of the Syracuse football program. Finally, thank you again to our sponsor, Home Field Apparel. Again, promo code NUNES24, NUNES24, for 15% off your first order at Home Field Apparel. Gentlemen, very happy to be back at this. Very happy to have a very interesting football team to be talking about. I will see you all back here at 8 p.m. Eastern next Sunday night. Go Orange.
Go Orange.